Well, thank you for having me again tonight. Well, it's not a great surprise. This is exactly, more or less, I mean, it's exactly the plan he said he would follow. And the way I interpret, if we step back and look at the bigger deal, of course, this is mainly directed against China to make the United States, in Trump's view, more competitive with China, more production taking place in the United States. So you'll notice he's particularly focused on Southeast Asia and Mexico and somewhat Canada because he's afraid that Chinese products, even though he puts tariffs on China, they come through Vietnam, for example, they come through Mexico into the US, and he wants to block this. So he's worked very hard there. He's not as concerned about that, the transshipment through Europe, although there is some of that. With Europe, it's mainly questions about digital taxes. It's also, which may have been resolved already, about automobiles and about agricultural products. And those talks seem to have been pretty well advanced. So I would take this 30% is a little bit shocking, but that's the way Trump negotiates.
مهم. طريقة تفاوض ترامب، ولكن يعني لم يحقق أي شيء بهذا الموضوع منذ بدأ التداول به ترامب. الرسوم الجمركية الآن أرسولا فون دير لاين تهدد بإجراءات مضادة، تقول بأنه الهدف هو الصين، ولكن أيضا الاتحاد الأوروبي يشعر بالتهديد. فما الإجراءات المضادة التي يستطيع الاتحاد الأوروبي القيام بها، أم أنها تفاوض أيضا؟
Well, the EU, of course, yes. Well, there have been intense negotiations going on all along. And my understanding, and also it's in most of the press here in Europe, it looks like a number of the questions have in principle been resolved already with the United States, and it's down to a few key issues. Um, one thing, of course, would be anything that was shipped through from China through the EU. Trump would be very upset about. But if we look at what's going on, the EU had a decision to impose some sanctions next week, some tariffs, I should say, on the U.S. in retaliation. But the word is from ministers off the record, they're saying probably they'll hold off on that until August 1st so as not to exacerbate the situation with Trump. And they're going to be negotiating intensively. It's really down to automobiles and also agricultural products. And my understanding is those discussions have gone quite a ways. With agricultural products, of course, the EU is sort of famous for putting protective tariffs on its farmers. And the United States wants to knock that down. Trump wants to knock it down. And I think there's some agreement on that. The last thing that was in the press, all we can do is say what's released to the press by unnamed people. And that might go down to as low as 10%. So we'll see. With automobiles, it's a little more complicated because the companies actually produce on both sides of the Atlantic. So one thing that was in the press this last week was that American auto companies wanted some to make some kind of deal if they produce things in Europe that it wouldn't get taxed coming back, and the same thing for European companies producing in the United States. I wouldn't be surprised if this is resolved before August 1st and we end up with some baseline tariff of 10% or maybe somewhat more. Of course, there's some particular things like aluminum and steel where it might be higher, but it looks like this is coming along fairly well, and we've still got a few weeks.
دكتور توماس أدونيل الخبير الاقتصادي